I am here from the Ukraine, from the UK. Sorry, I wish I was in the Ukraine with all you guys, but unfortunately, American passports make it a little difficult to get around these days. But at least we were able to do this remotely. So I guess welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be presenting to you about mainly my experience, but also just practical tips and tricks in general for traveling while working. We'll just get started with the slides here. So I always like to start these out with who am I and why am I here? Mainly because it changes. Well, who I am doesn't change, but the topic that I'm presenting on, I usually, try to pick these, that are close to my heart. So that part changes pretty much every time. So in general, I'm a German to English translator, specialized in automotive, construction, real estate, and tourism, which comes in handy with this. I've been translating freelance since 2008, off and on in the beginning, and then in-house for a couple of years towards the beginning as well, and also as part of a research assistantship during my graduate program. And I have been translating while traveling quite a bit since 2013, so most of this is going to focus on the period since then. And I call myself a quasi-digital nomad. I'm not a full digital nomad. I don't, travel 100% of the time. And it's, good to sort of, have a few places where you can go and spend a few more months before you get back on the road, because it does get, wearing down on you at times. But with COVID and stuff, we're definitely looking forward to getting back out there once we can. So... next question, and you may ask yourself, why? How did I get here? Silly Talking Heads reference, sorry. So I guess it's been a little bit of a journey, so I'm going to break it down over time here for you. I would say it kind of all began in 2012 when I was working in-house in the United States. And I had a side project that I really wanted to work on at home. And I didn't really have any personal resources, any CAT tools or anything like that. Everything that I worked on up until that point had always been in the office. So basically, I was looking for a CAT tool to sort of get started with. And I didn't really want to invest, too much in it since I was still mainly working in-house. And I came across WordFast Anywhere, which I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with. I don't really use it now, but it was really interesting to see their marketing materials back then, because they were basically saying on the website something along the lines of, imagine being able to translate, on your phone or a tablet from anywhere. And certainly back in 2012, I still had quite a dumb phone. So I was definitely not thinking that was going to be possible the way that it, I suppose, in theory is now. So I guess there are people out there that are, capable of that are doing that occasionally, at least. I hope they're not doing it too much because the screens are pretty darn small. But that sort of changed the way that I was thinking altogether, just seeing that this marketing campaign was going along those lines and sort of envisioning that future for the profession in general. And in I would say a relatively short time, I mean, look where we are now, where compared to where we were in 2012 technology wise, it really is pretty much possible to work from nearly anywhere in the world, and that's where we're going to go further along in the presentation. In 2013, I had moved to Bucharest. I'd gotten a job in-house with a Romanian company. And one of the really striking things about, just transitioning into this new working environment was, from day one, they were, encouraging us to, work, on the beach if we wanted to. The PMs would just, leave on Friday and, come back on Tuesday a lot. And, it didn't disrupt the flow of work really at all, because it was just part of the culture in that office. Like every employee basically had their own powerful laptop that had a docking station for, your spot in the office. And then, a lot of us would, take them home almost every night. I personally like to keep my work to the office at that point still. But most of my colleagues that had extensive freelance experience were, taking theirs home every night and, getting back to it after, a break or whatever. So that was really eye-opening for me, just like the amount of freedom, and that a company was promoting it. That was, just something I wasn't expecting. Certainly with, my American background too, there's a very a cultural aversion to that, I think, which may be changing now with COVID. But it's definitely was, an eye opener to see that. So by the time 2014 came around, I had basically gone independent, full-time freelance for the first time ever. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to Bucharest in August, but it's very hot, and my apartment did not have air conditioning. So this was actually sort of where I really took my first real steps to becoming a more mobile translator. Basically, I would, find a cafe or, go to an establishment owned by a friend of mine, and, with air conditioning, and just work from there. So that really, I became mobile within the city, sort of as a comfort zone to begin with. And that was a sort of nice way to ease into it. So then by the time 2015 came around, I went to the BP translation conference, my first translation conference ever, actually, in Zagreb. And I had a flight booked back to Bucharest from Belgrade. But I was just sitting there at the end of the conference thinking, well, I don't necessarily really want to go back. And, got out the map, kind of looked at it. I noticed that this town that I had always wanted to go to in Hungary, Strombathely, happened to be, about a 3-hour train ride away. Actually, probably less, but, you got to stand around changing trains and stuff. And I was like, well, what's stopping me, And when I really thought about it, there really wasn't anything stopping me from just going. So I went to Strombathely for about 4 or 5 days. The picture down in the bottom left-hand corner there is my first real mobile office, as I like to call them, just the cafe that I set up shop in there. And it was a really, really good experience. And I basically, sort of spent about 3 weeks making my way back overland to Bucharest, completely unplanned. And it was really something that sort of, changed everything. I think that summer I only spent about, 2 or 3 days in Bucharest, too. So, and so those are just, some background on how this all came about. So this is a quote that I really liked that I found on a wall in a hostel in Krakow that same summer. So this 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones that you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. And so that kind of really, spoke to me. And I found that inspiring. And, I decided, what's stopping me from doing that, So a little bit further along in the trip, this is where things really, really start getting, full-time travel was basically last year in April. I decided I was going to spend, I originally planned to do 6 months just wandering around the Balkans. I ended up cutting it short, so it was 4 months, and then I came to the UK. But it was still just a, completely different experience, just like straight up not, having an apartment to go back to, really. I put everything in storage, and that kind of stuff, like just literally living out of what's in your suitcase, and working while doing it. And then this January, right before this whole COVID thing came along, I had been planning to do 4 months in Africa. I was going to a translation conference in Tanzania that I spoke at there in beginning of February. And I figured, well, Africa, seems like a pretty interesting opportunity. I wasn't sure if the infrastructure was going to be as reliable as it had been in the Balkans. I actually found on a practical level, it actually ended up in some ways much more reliable, but that's we'll be getting to that further on, I think. And unfortunately, then COVID came and it did kind of get serious quite quickly. So I did end up heading back to the UK towards, on March 24th, apparently, right when everything was really shutting down. One of the last flights out, actually. But anyway, so, but it's very doable. And that was a real big eye opener as well. And and after COVID, I hope to make it to the Ukraine. I've always wanted to do the Ukraine in depth, and probably a little more time in Moldova and head down back towards Romania that way. So let's hope that we can be doing that sometime soon. So now on to more just travel industry findings, general findings about some of the practicalities of all of this. So in the travel industry, which is one of my specialties anyway, and I've been attending quite a lot of online travel industry events since this has started, and had been going to a few industry events in person before. In the travel industry, there were certain trends that were already in place before COVID that were certainly things that have an impact on how we travel. So over tourism is definitely had been a massive one. I mean, you'd had places like Venice and Dubrovnik literally trying everything they could to limit the number of people that were going there. And then sustainability was also a massive issue for a lot of travelers, with the Greta Thunberg stuff, for example. People were really becoming a lot more conscious about their ecological footprint while flying, things like that. Those were certainly the prevailing trends before. And while they're still very, very important trends, I think, for example, we won't be seeing very much over tourism, hopefully returning quite to those levels, because simply for, nobody wants to get infected. And so nobody's really going to, I wouldn't be putting Dubrovnik high on my lists right now, for example, just for the fact, even when it's fairly empty, it's probably still pretty crowded, and that really increases the risk of transmission. So those two issues have basically sort of changed overnight. I mean, you're seeing so many single-use plastics and stuff like that coming back, which had been completely, avoided before. Now, the most pressing issues that we're facing now seem to be the expected trend is domestic travel returning first, which in a lot of ways will make traveling and working at the same time for people getting started doing it a lot easier, probably, because you don't have the same practical considerations like what phones are you going to be able to have reliable phone service, because in your own country, I would presume you probably already have reliable phone service. So that's an interesting trend, and one that certainly is going to help. Let's see. And then we have, like I said, with the over-tourism, nobody wants to go to Dubrovnik right now for practical reasons. But people are really wanting to go off the beaten track, like up to mountains, someplace where there's nobody around to, not nobody, but, fewer chances of infection, fewer vectors, that kind of thing. Then there's the trend towards fewer touch points. So I went out, for example, to lunch in Leeds yesterday for the first time I'd eaten out since all this happened. And literally everything that you order on your phone, you pay on your phone. You basically do everything entirely, with your own stuff. You can basically get by without pretty much touching anything at all in the restaurant. And there are trends towards trying to make hotels like hotel room access on your phone, that kind of stuff. So we're going to be seeing that a lot more. That said, I actually found it interesting. I saw 3 people out yesterday working in a bar in Leeds on their laptops. So I guess mobile work is already starting to come back. Although I'm leaving the laptop at home for now personally, but anyway, and another thing that we're all looking for right now, I think, when we go places, we want to feel safe. So we want to, observe that there is visible cleaning going on, whereas before the actual industry trend was to avoid seeing that at all. So I think that's going to change. Those are all factors that are just going to change the kind of destinations we choose, which is going to be interesting. So on to just remote work in general. The traditional stigma against remote work is giving way to progress, which is good. I mean, it was already being viewed as a perk. A lot of companies in, like, say, Silicon Valley and stuff were going towards models where you had unlimited vacation time or could work from anywhere just as long as the work got done. And certainly, like, companies like my sister works for American Express, and I'm pretty sure they were allowed, like, X number of work from home days before every year or something like that. Well, now she's completely working from home until at least next year. So it's for practical considerations, it's gone overnight from just being a perk to sort of being expected. And this is a move towards giving the workers more freedom. People were already, pushing back towards just this idea that, the longer that you're, in the office, the more work you're getting done or stuff like that. And it's very, very clear that I think for us, especially as freelancers, we're well aware that that whole 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week thing doesn't necessarily actually equal the same kind of automatic productivity. But for particularly in, say, American culture, there was still just that expectation, and quite a lot of managers still probably have this in their head that if they can't physically see the employee, then no work's getting done. But at least, that, well, I mean, people are still working. So it's worked out well, in that respect. And I've even seen a few translation agencies starting advertising while looking for translators that, you can work from anywhere. And I don't think even a few years ago we were really seeing that being embraced as much. I feel like I used to have at least a few clients who were still a little bit, sketched. They sort of expect you to, have like an office in your house or something like that. So, well, it's just interesting. But yes, necessity is the mother of invention, and the necessity of what's happened with COVID has absolutely, just gotten rid of or knocked down a lot of these arguments against remote work and made it considerably more socially, acceptable from a societal viewpoint. And like I keep saying, the work still gets done. So that's the most important thing, really. So, but before you hit the beach, we do have to talk about a few practical considerations, like insurance. This is pretty key, actually, as I learned well, I think a lot of people did right when the pandemic hit. But so anyway, you need health insurance. So I'm maybe the only American out there saying that. No, just kidding. But yeah, I mean, you need health insurance because, a pandemic or something could hit. And I guess the big question there, I'd say, is do you buy your insurance from some domestic company or like Allianz or something like that? Will your health insurance from home actually cover you if you just pay a little bit extra for your destination, that sort of thing? Or there are also things like nomad insurance out there. And I've got a little bit of my policy over there on the side. That's basically one of the, that's not my policy, that's a warning that they sent out actually. So I had joined Safety Wing actually only shortly before the pandemic. So I was actually quite surprised how good they were at keeping people up to date. But I mean, I didn't even know when I signed up, but apparently my insurance actually covered repatriation in case it was actually needed. And that did actually end up kicking in, I believe around March 9th or something. The dates were actually very, very important for how the policy was written. But basically what I'm saying, and I didn't end up having to take advantage of that anyway. I mean, I wasn't going back to the US. So, but the point is, it's very, very important to read your policy very carefully because you might be surprised at what's actually covered and what isn't. A lot of them don't cover pandemics. A lot of them don't cover anything related to pandemics. So that's stuff to keep in mind. And they may even have add-ons, like mine ended up offering an extra package that specifically covers COVID if you wanted it. And so that's, something to always weigh, everybody's decision, but certainly something to consider. And then the question of payment of how your insurance is paid for too may factor in. There's another competing insurance company. I'm trying to remember their name. They're quite famous. But what they want you to do always is pay completely upfront, which certainly makes sense for smaller trips, but it doesn't really make sense if you don't know how long your trip is or exactly where you're going or that sort of thing. So these are factors for, you to decide individually, but they're absolutely, important to be aware that they exist. And also some destinations may cost you extra on your policy. I find anytime I look at one that covers anything in the US, they're pretty much always an extra charge. So it's definitely, something to always keep in mind. So now your phone and internet service. For the mobile translator, this is probably the most important factor because this is your lifeline. And so there are certain considerations. Do you buy a local SIM card or can you bring yours from home? Now, a few years ago, using yours from home in any other country was pretty much out of the question. But with how the EU made it, I think that was a couple years ago, made it so that, all EU SIM cards should work in all the other EU countries. That's always an option if you're in an EU country. And you see neighboring countries. I'm not sure about the situation in Ukraine, but in the Balkans, for example, they were supposedly making a similar kind of pact with a lot of the former Yugoslav countries, the non-EU ones, claiming that their SIM cards are all supposed to work in the others. Now that law came in while I was in the Balkans, and as far as I could tell, it didn't actually get it. I mean, it is apparently on the books, but in practice, it isn't working that way. So in the Balkans, I've still found that I had to buy a new SIM card every time I changed countries, which can get quite annoying when it's like, Serbia to Montenegro. I mean, Montenegro is very, very small, and it's the same exact telephone company actually that I bought. It's just two separate countries. So it was a bit annoying, but those are, things to think about. For your clients to be able to reach you, you might be wondering how to keep a static number. And in 2020, there are actually a lot of ways to do this. So we're actually, quite lucky compared to how things were a few years ago. So I'll just list a few options. I mean, there's Google Voice. There are similar services that I buy mine through can't remember, but anyway, I purchased mine through. I have a static UK number that I always have forward to my phone, and then there are other options, like if you happen to have a remote office service, they may offer local numbers as well. For my LLC that is registered in the US, I was offered that kind of service. I decided I didn't want it, but it was a pretty reasonable price. But yeah, there's just loads of options for getting a static number. And if you have any specific questions, you can direct them at me in the questions. But it's just basically not really a hurdle anymore. You may ask how much data you'll need. That is up to everybody. Basically, since it's so important, what I do is just buy the maximum amount of data that they'll give me when I change countries, typically, unless I'm only going to be there a very, very short period of time. And at least in Tanzania, that came in very, very handy. Emergency top-ups. There are actually a number of services online now. If you actually just Google emergency top-ups, they'll probably all pop up. And for just a small surcharge, usually you can literally top up your phone from anywhere, pretty much any time of day. And I've done this, probably at least 20 times now in different countries, and I've not yet come across any phone provider that it doesn't work with. I'm not saying that there aren't any, but yeah, in Tanzania, that was a huge, huge vital thing to have and to know about, because the internet at most places, the internet was quite reliable, but every now and then I came across a place where it wasn't, and then having that maximum amount of data on your phone and being able to top it up when you need it immediately is really quite vital. And that leads right into be wary when it comes to relying on the accommodation having internet. Or even power for that matter. I've literally gone to a place in Sarajevo where this was through Airbnb actually, and when I arrived there, the woman started lighting candles in the apartment, and I was like, but that's unusual. And it turned out that her son had forgotten to pay the bill, so there was literally no electricity and no internet for a day or so, which is inconvenient if you have a deadline. I didn't, so that was lucky. I did end up going into town and doing some work the next day, so just be wary and have your stuff charged up, and that's another good reason why having a ton of data on your phone is pretty vital. And then power. So more on power. With converters, be prepared. There's not much else to say other than that, I guess. But and unfortunately, with converters, you can never be too prepared either. I mean, you can still be caught unprepared, because you never know if, for example, you're flying to the United States, and giant blizzard comes and hits the British Isles, and you end up stuck in Dublin for a week. That actually happened to my fiance a couple of years ago. The thing was, because he was going to the US, he actually didn't have any of the any EU chargers with him at all. So that can be quite a hurdle. So having a universal charger is probably the best route to go for that on hand. And even then, there may be some, like South Africa, that it might not actually have that, if it's a rare one, or like those northern Italian ones. I've never found any that seem to have that reliably on them. With cables, I guess just be cautious. Try not to get them too kinked up. And I actually bought a few in Tanzania. This was apparently quite a big problem. It had happened to a few other people too, where literally the cable itself that you buy, it looks fine, but it actually can only transmit a very, very tiny amount of power, like so little that my phone was charging like negative power. Like it said it was charging, but it was actually like losing battery as it was charging. I don't know how that happens, but I'm just saying, be cautious. If there's a new cable and something weird's going on, don't just automatically assume it's your phone. Train your eye to scope out power outlets when you're looking for a spot to work. It's becoming much easier because everybody is working mobily. Certainly in Western Europe, you're not going to have very much trouble most places in big cities finding an outlet these days. But it can be a problem, and if you're sitting down to work, you want the outlet there. You don't want to be having to move around, and you don't want to be draining your battery just in case you need battery later. Unexpected power dips, they can and do happen. Dips, yeah, so that's another good reason to keep your stuff as charged as possible when you're on the road. And here's a pretty important one. Don't leave devices or literally anything else important on the floor. If you look over at the picture on the right, that is where I stayed at in Zanzibar, and it was on the first floor of a 3-story building, and it seemed, pretty watertight until I came back after a rainstorm, and there was about a foot worth of water, not a foot, a few inches of water on the floor that stayed for about a week, and it was just quite lucky that my laptop or anything else wasn't, on the floor, because it never would have occurred to me that could flood, but it did. So something to watch out for. Power banks, you want as big a power bank as you possibly can, and you want to pay attention to the voltage too. Some laptops, my Microsoft Surface, for example, in theory can be charged from power banks now, but they have to be a certain voltage. And it has to be through USB-C, I believe. So I haven't actually gotten this to work yet, but in theory it is possible, and I haven't gotten it to work because I basically don't have. Sorry about that. I don't know what that was. Sorry. Yeah. So anyway, in theory, some computers can even be charged with phone power banks now, so it's something to keep in mind. And you could even go for a solar panel. That's very popular in Africa. But the problem with those is you can't actually take them on planes for the most part, is my understanding. So, but we'll probably be seeing more of that happening in the future. Okay, so as for paperwork, that is a picture of the printer that I lugged around the Balkans. I do not recommend doing that. It's just very annoying, and you don't end up needing them nearly as much as you think you will, is what I found at least. You can usually ask your hotel. They'll usually print something for you. Depending on where you are, there may be print shops. In Africa, I could see that being a bigger problem. But for the most part, they do still exist. There are supposedly very, very compact printers that are coming out that can sort of, just scoot around like a little robot almost and print. So those are apparently out there, but I haven't seen any anyone using them practically yet. And then there's always, stored signatures, e-signatures, and touchscreens. Like I have a touchscreen on my Microsoft Surface, so presumably this just won't be a problem at all in the future because I can just sign it with my Surface Pen on the screen. And I think that is going to be something that we'll be seeing a lot more of too, with touchscreens becoming more and more out there. Let's see. And transport and events, I think we're just, especially with COVID, we're going to be seeing a lot of our tickets just on our phones from now on. I took 4 flights within Tanzania, And for all of them, I did not bring a printout of the ticket. I just had a copy of it on my phone, and that seemed perfectly acceptable to all of them. And I think that's just the reality of what is going to become reality in the future. For packing, developing a packing system, massive help. Packing cubes are your friend. You can see my very, very organized suitcase up there in the front. What is that? Left? Sorry. Yeah, so that is a very, very organized suitcase, but that only came about because in the Balkans, I had a very, very disorganized suitcase, and I learned my lesson. So, so definitely something to think about, having a packing system there. Wheels or no wheels, that's everybody's choice. I happen to prefer them, but most long-term travelers seem not to. But yeah. And one of the reasons I prefer them actually is weight, because I do tend to travel very, very heavy, basically at the limit of what I can check the bag at, which most people disagree with. But it's just my system. And then you're going to want sort of a mobile office, is what I call it. Just, a very dependable backpack, preferably with, anti-theft-ish kind of measures, stuff, something where they can't just, unzip it and grab your laptop or something, I mean, it seems like a practical thing, but it's just, it seems obvious, but it is a very, very vital part of the system. And then you're going to want just a bag in addition to your mobile office bag for stuff where you just need you need a backpack or something to tote around, groceries or whatever, and you just don't want to be moving your laptop and all of that stuff constantly out of the other bag. So yeah, I use this compact backpack right now. And before that, I was using that orange and white bag in the Balkans. To lock up or not to lock up, basically your suitcases when you check them, that's philosophical, I guess. Some people say it draws more attention and makes it more likely that your stuff's going to get stolen. I personally don't bother locking them, especially because, I mean, at least if, for example, if I'm going to the US, TSA can unlock or will unlock them anyway. So it's just easier for me, I guess, not to even worry about it. And you're going to want a compact, lightweight machine, make frequent backups, sorry. You may want portable screens. A lot of people are traveling with these. They're basically just an extra screen that you can hook up to your machine. I don't know. I don't feel the need for that yet, and that's partially because I'm already pretty much maxing out the weight that I can deal with right now. But it's something to keep in mind. I mentioned USB-C before. If you have a USB-C port, it's entirely possible that you may be able to actually, charge your phone, charge your computer off of it, depending on your model, and that'll probably be something that we'll be seeing more in the future. So definitely worth thinking about. When you're finding a place to work, if you're going to be somewhere for a while, I like to always establish sort of a relationship with that establishment, because sometimes, if you want to go for a swim, you can just ask them, if they'll watch your backpack, and a lot of times it'll work, sort of a trust kind of thing. And it's just, it's just a lot less hassle, like if you have a pre-existing relationship sort of with, the place that you've been working at. And then on top of that, I'd say live your brand. As you can see over there, I've got a Brickner Translations t-shirt. I get them pretty much every time I get more business cards, because it's just another extra $5 or something for the shirt. So I'm like, why not? And people do comment on it, when you're traveling. Or if you've got a translator at work sticker on your machine. I don't yet because I just got this neat skin with my business colors on it. But it's definitely a conversation starter, and you never know, it can definitely lead to work, or at least good conversation, and it gets your brand image out there. And we're sort of running out of time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to just rush through these a little bit. So for travel days, the days that you are, going to be really moving, do not count on being able to work on public transportation. You may get lucky and you may be able to, or as in this picture to the right, you may be squeezed up against a door until Manchester for some reason. So you just never know, and you can't count on it. So get your work done before moving, if at all possible. Let's see, or plan in time to do it after you get to your destination, which is probably better, because then you can take advantage of, if you do get lucky enough to be able to work on it on the transportation. I always try to keep longer travel days to weekends if possible, especially if you're changing countries, because you're going to need to get a new SIM card in a lot of cases in the next country. So that's something to always keep in mind. Internet on the plane, is it worth it? That's cost benefit analysis, I guess. I have yet to find one where paying for it is actually worth it to me. And I think that's what a lot of people are also saying. But if, for some reason, circumstances make it that way, then, maybe it's worth the upgrade. Things to think about when changing countries, mainly just the SIM card thing. Like, if you're going to be needing a new SIM card right away when you get there, then you're going to need to do that. And it can be a hassle when you realize once you've arrived, you don't have internet to even figure out how to find a SIM card. So always something to think about. When to book accommodation, that's a personal decision. I personally generally like to try and do it as last minute as possible, actually. But a lot of people, that's a bit probably not their style. Accommodation red flags. Not every place that's marked as workspace friendly actually is. We had one place in Sarajevo, the same one with the power outage, that said they were workspace friendly, and it was actually like a dresser or something. I don't know. For me, it's less of a problem. I don't mind, working on my lap or whatever. But for some people, it's a pretty annoying thing to deal with. And not every place that advertises a backup generator actually has it working. I think a few colleagues in Tanzania mentioned this, and it was a real hassle at their place when the power went out. Cultural confusion. Oh, the hot tub paradox. For some reason in the Balkans, all these places on Airbnb were advertising they had a hot tub. Well, it turned out they actually meant a hot water heater, not like a hot tub you swim in. So that led to a lot of my disappointment till I figured that out. But anyway, the point is that you have to be able to roll with, these unexpected things when there's, stuff you weren't quite expecting. And also, just pro tip, most or all flat screen TVs can easily just be used as a second screen. If you need one, just plug in an HDMI cable and it works. So it's always good to have an HDMI cable with you too. Just I don't carry too many random cables that don't serve a purpose or an immediate purpose, but HDMI cable, I always make sure I have one of those with. And be aware that some places literally don't have addresses or passable roads. That the picture down there is in Dar es Salaam, and I went out for dinner in the middle of a rainstorm and almost didn't come back, I guess. No. But there were literal, holes in the road, like car-sized holes, and it was quite terrifying. And I had a deadline, so that did not lead to a very happy dinner, not being sure if I was going to, be able to actually get back to do the work I had to do. Luckily, it worked out. But just be aware of that. Maybe it was a very small order. It was like something where if I'd have just gotten it out of the way before going, then it wouldn't have, been on my mind all night, but lesson learned there. And save yourself unnecessary stress. Download your projects locally as soon as you possibly can. If you absolutely need Wi-Fi when you're going to a restaurant or something, ask them before you order for sure. Yeah, it does still happen occasionally that places don't have Wi-Fi. It still happens. Always be prepared for your uploads to take a lot longer than expected if you're on an unfamiliar internet connection. So always leave a nice time cushion there. And try to keep your devices as fully charged as possible. There's the taxi hotel trick. This one's just handy. Like if you really need a taxi, but you don't trust walking up to one on the street, if there's a nice looking hotel, if you go in and pretend to be a guest or just ask nicely, a lot of times they'll just help you out because it's good. It helps their image. And recognize when you just can't work. And recognize when you need to shell out to get yourself out of a situation, like if you're in Africa and there's a pandemic. I'm going to have to really skip over this, but how to approach it with your customers. Some won't care, and some still might not like it. But yeah, I think that's just an individual thing. Occasionally time zones will work in your favor. Sometimes they don't, and that's just something you kind of have to accept and be able to live with. The philosophical question, what does out of office actually mean if there isn't an actual physical office? That's more philosophical than anything else, but I think as a society in general, we're going to be struggling with that one, actually. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. And that you just always have to keep in mind some parts of the world are going to be more dangerous, remote, or random to work from. And that's just something that you have to kind of acknowledge and weigh. And as a freelancer, how much you want to tell your clients about if you're traveling, what you're doing, that sort of thing. As always, it's really your call. But you still need to be open about key and important details, like if you really, really can't do something. Like when I was basically worried I wasn't going to get out of Africa, I had about 4 days between the flight where I was just sitting in Dar es Salaam, and my clients kept asking me to work, and I was like, I just had to be honest and tell them, I'm sorry, I'm stuck in Africa and I'm way too stressed. I would love to do this job because it would give me something to do, but the amount of stress that I'm under, I can't guarantee quality work. And that, certainly with it being COVID, it's already unusual, a situation where it's understandable. But it's still important to let them know. And maintaining boundaries. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Someone asked on a group while I was in Tanzania if it's possible to work while climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, the answer to that is technically yes. All of the base camps, all of the camps on the climb apparently do have internet connection now, hotspots or whatever. But the question is, why would you want to? That's the best out of office excuse ever. I'm climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, And I found out recently too, apparently there's 5G on Mount Everest. But again, why would you want to be working while you're climbing Mount Everest? So don't be afraid to take a day off. 24/7 availability is a very slippery slope. So, sorry, thank you all. Hope I didn't go too much over time or keep you guys from dinner. And I'm happy to answer any questions or comments. That's my email down there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeanette, for all those valuable tips and precautions. I see that most of them were gained through unpleasant and sometimes very tough situations. So it's really priceless. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Hi, thank you very much for that informative presentation. It was something like translators-oriented travel show. Thank you very much. So my question is, how do you cope with the time difference? Because you travel so much to different parts of the world, and well, it's quite okay when you are traveling just for tourism or for leisure, for pleasure, and so on. But if it is about deadline, and if you need to meet that deadline, do your customers understand that? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, my main problem with this has generally only been in the United States, I would say, actually. It's just when I go to visit my parents, it's literally just the opposite of German time, basically, 7 hours difference. And I don't have any good ways to cope with that other than sort of avoiding going there whenever possible. But if you go the other direction, I've always found it's always better to be, for me at least, to be a few hours ahead of Germany. So like I said, it's a give or a take on that. But it's yeah. So it's something everybody has to sort of cope with that individually. So.
Questions more?
Yeah. I have a mic. I will have one question from online audience. It's a question from Sofia Gutkin. She was our speaker today, earlier. Jeanette, I have so many questions because I'm in a very similar situation, living out of suitcase at the moment. Do you miss being able to work in cafes at the moment because of COVID-19? Yes. Okay.
Definitely.
How are you able to stay in Europe for so long despite having US passport?
Well, it's part of the reason why I travel, I guess, at the moment. I've in the past usually had Romanian or Czech residency for years at a time. But for the last couple of years, I've been having a few more hiccups um, trying to get residency. So it's complicated. I'm in the UK because my fiance is British. She's actually speaking on Friday, I think, Nigel Wheatley. Um, so we do sort of have this as a base, but it's complicated trying to get UK residency as well. So it's part of the reason why I bounce around so much, actually.
Thank you. And another question from Sophia is, how does this continuous travel affect your relationships with friends, family, and so on?
For most of them, I mean, I wouldn't say it's too rough on friendships. I already live separately from most of my friends anyway. And I guess how it affects my personal relationship, I actually think Nigel and I roll with it pretty well, weirdly. I don't know.
Okay,
We probably
thank
talk
you.
more today than we do when I'm here. So.
Okay, thank you. So it was our last question for today, and it was our last speech for today. And Jeanette, thank you very much